give people a little bit of insight on how you converted these cold emails and networking calls. Like, how did you get them to say yes? Hey, this is Patrick Curtis, CEO and founder of Wall Street Oasis. Today we have another great chat with Max. Max had a really interesting story. He was in the middle of transferring from Boston College to Cornell when he joined WSO Academy. But what was really most interesting about him was how he stacked off-cycle internships. So it wasn't just one or two or three, it was actually four off-cycle internships. So I talked to him a little bit about that, tried to figure out, how he was able to do it. Take a listen. Enjoy. All right, Max, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so it'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a quick summary bio, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, of course. My name is Max Guan, a rising junior at Cornell University at the Dyson School studying finance. Really joined the academy back in my kind of just towards the end of my freshman year. Actually, I transferred during this process as well from Boston College to Cornell, so I can dive a little bit deeper on that end as well. But was really kind of drawn to the idea of investment banking earlier on and throughout high school, but I'll ultimately have that ran throughout my college career, but and also going into banking as well for my junior summer. So really happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think what jumps out to me, and I mentioned this right before we started recording, was like how many off-cycle internships you were able to land. So I want to dive into that a little bit. But first, let's talk a little bit more about like the decision to go to BC and then to transfer. Walk us through that. What was the thought process on like, hey, I want to get to Cornell, and obviously because BC has a pretty good presence on Wall Street. So just in terms of your thought process of obviously going to an Ivy is helps, but talk to me a little bit about that because it's pretty competitive at Cornell too.
Yeah, of course. So I think initially what drew me to BC was, I want to be an econ major and, BC offered that opportunity for me. And the reason why I want to be an econ major was because I like the idea of combining finance, but also public policy. And that interest kind of derived from entrepreneurial background, but also the courses that I took from high school.
Hmm.
But when it comes to, transferring, upon taking a few courses at Boston College, I realized that it's a little bit too theoretical for my liking. So not too much focused on a career path or applicable to my eventual, I guess, ambitions professionally.
Hmm.
So given that kind of reflection, I realized, what, it might be wise for me to at least give it a shot to apply to an undergrad business school, right? So I think from a few different kind of just lists and also comparisons between different schools, Cornell stood out because it's a very small business school in a bigger campus, right? So that kind of feeling and that proportion, I guess you can say, for the student body for the Dyson School compared to the entire campus really struck out to me, and I think ultimately it worked out great, and that's what really led me to transfer to Cornell.
Got it. And in terms of like how people should think about like a similar transfer thing, I assume you need to kind of keep a really high GPA from your initial school. Any other like words of advice in terms of other people who may be thinking of doing the same thing? Maybe they're coming up to the end of the freshman year. I guess you kind of have to know, like, when do you have to know in terms of drop dead? Because now we're in July, probably too late now, right? If they want to start sophomore year somewhere else. But talk a little bit about that in terms of timing and decision.
Yeah, I would say one thing that I learned throughout the process is you can't have the mentality to get out of a school once you get into it. So I didn't have the what's it called, like the guaranteed transfer option to Cornell. I didn't have that. So for me, it was a kind of like a brand new process. And I think my mindset when I was applying to Cornell was that I'll be great where I am at BC.
Yeah.
But obviously, it could be great to be more aligned with my career interests if I do transfer to Cornell successfully. So I think that's one thing to be really mindful of. The second one is to make sure you build a really strong connection on campus at your former institution. So at Boston College, I was active, I was participating in clubs, not because of the sake of transferring, because that wasn't really the priority for me at the time.
Mhm.
It's more because of, I want to be involved. I want to learn from, the mentors, the seniors from that institution as well, from investment clubs to learning about maybe private equity to entrepreneurship, et cetera. I think that's very key to have, and also be close with your professors and also other faculty members as well, because sometimes they may be able to help you or at least orient you to make your decision more seamlessly. And I
Yeah.
think that really alleviates the pressure of transferring as well. So I think it's
Cool.
beyond all the extracurriculars, your application profile, et cetera. I think having that on-campus connection and mindset to be okay with whatever happens is really important to me, or at least to
Yeah.
someone that.
So when did you hear? When did you know that it was that you had gotten in, and what was the date around? Is it
Ooh, I
morning?
think I think it's probably towards around maybe like May, I would say. I remember it was like the first batches of decisions coming out for transferring, and I think I got it pretty early on. I think under Cornell, I think it releases in waves. I've heard. I'm not really sure if that was the case, but
So
I think
around that's when you joined us. So
exactly.
it's like you found out you're going to Cornell, you're like, okay, let's ramp it up even more. I'm going to go into academy. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about like that decision. So finance, it seems like banking was on your radar already, IB specifically. And so you were like, you know what? I'm going to Cornell. I'm gonna, also do this program, this intensive program. Talk to me a little bit about that decision to kind of join us at that stage. Because I think did you have something lined up for freshman summer at that point?
I think I might have around the same time.
Yeah.
So I was cold emailing at that stage as well. But joining the academy, I think so. I learned about WSO actually through my prior internship during my gap year before going to Boston College, and I was the chief editor at one point. So it's really just I know about the program.
Yeah.
I think what kind of really ultimately made me decided to join was I think transferring itself requires a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of you have to adapt to a new environment. You have to kind of rebuild that on-campus connection and the alumni of the institution that you previously had before but now lost.
Yeah.
Also at the same time, a lot of credit situations where you have to take new courses that are probably stricter on the grading scale as well, from what I've heard.
Yeah.
I did some research and also calls with people who are at Cornell before I joined Cornell, kind of hearing about their stories and also their experiences. And from what I've been told is that at least when you first joined Dyson, the core classes that you'll be taking will be very time consuming or a little bit harder than the normal electives that you would have later on in your college career. So I thought, to balance everything, it's going to be very messy and it's hard to, kind of have someone there to always tell me, you have to have these things done, but also at the same time, establish a certain framework or ability to kind of enter the recruiting process more, I guess, head on and straightforwardly. So I think the academy definitely provides that scope of here are the structures of what you should be preparing for as you go week by week. Here's a mindset you should have entering the recruiting process. Here are some of the key pointers as well as the soft skills that you couldn't really learn from, I guess the technical cheat sheets
Yeah.
while you do the networking calls as well as the actual interviews themselves. So I think having all of those things bundled up into one package made sense to have that be decision making point for me to enter the program at that point.
And then as you're kind of thinking, you're knowing all this stuff, you're talking to people at Cornell, you know about the grade deflation. Are you like second guessing yourself at all? You're like, oh man, and what am I doing? Because GPA obviously really matters, but obviously maybe you realize that actually a lot of the offers might be out or the networking might already be out by the time you've done all your resume drops. So you may not even have a semester at Cornell. What was your thought process in terms of that GPA?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident in myself in terms of my academic abilities. So I think, obviously it's going to be hard. I've been notified by a few mentors actually when I first joined the academy, but before I actually formalized my decision to join Cornell, that, there might be a short-term setback in terms of the connection aspect of things, right? Because we have other current first years or previous first years at Cornell who had that connection with seniors who are now, by the time I'm a sophomore, first year analysts at those firms, right? So I don't have that connection myself. So it'll be a setback in some regard, but I think, having that mental support, whether from the academy, but also just from my own goals to fuel myself to be able to, try my best in different courseworks, I think trumps any doubts that I had in my mind, even though it might be harder, but I think it's worth the transition.
Were you able to kind of have a lighter course load that first semester, or did you just jump straight in, or like were you pretty much maxed out? Because like I assume since you joined us in May, you were able to kind of make some good progress with us over the summer before starting school. But was that kind of your goal, like use the summer to kind of get ready a little bit in terms of the technicals, the behaviorals, and then kind of be able to hit school full on? Talk to me a little bit about that because I know I try to advise people, sophomores, like lighten the course load if you can, because that first semester comes fast.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the course load is pre kind of scheduled for me. So I wouldn't say it's the hardest course schedule because there's a one pass fail course, which is, not that bad, but it is 17 credits in total. So I would say it's definitely not the lightest
No, it's not light.
fall semester. And also I was joining clubs on campus, right? Because, having that club connection on campus really makes it easier for you to access that alumni network as well. And it really took a lot of time, especially the business fraternity I became a part of. That's pretty brutal in terms of how much preparation you need to do every single week to prepare for the deliverables. But I think it almost mimics what investment banking might look like. And in that sense, it helps you kind of better balance your work life schedule knowing how to prepare well in
Yeah,
advance of
talk to me
time.
about that's interesting. Talk to me about that business frat. What do you have to do? How many hours per week, and like what are they forcing you guys to do? And then I want to get into like so when you got on campus, let's talk about this, and then the networking. I want to start talking about networking, but yeah, tell
Mhm.
me a little bit more of the business frat. Like, what do they make you do, and do they have good connections into to Wall Street?
So I would say they definitely help you. Like there are certain, seniors and also first years who are in on Wall Street, so that helps for sure. We have these weekly calls with those people
Nice.
when they're available to have that network access. So we also have like these New York City treks where we actually go to the offices into the city to be able to have that exposure. So I think those things definitely helped. When it comes to, I guess, the hours a week and also what we did. So one thing about Cornell and the business clubs there is that it kind of mimics, again, like the whole recruiting cycle for investment banks. So we'll have rounds of interviews. You'll have to have coffee chats with current club members and also information sessions that to attend. And they'll actually mark you off just like, I guess, the actual investment banks as well to kind of make sure you have that demonstrated interest, but also that continuation of dedication to that given club. So that took a lot of time for the first few weeks going on campus. And once that started, a lot of, I guess technical reviews, a lot of case studies, a lot of kind of presentation skills as well. Like, we had like M&A merger models, case studies, we had stock pitches, etc. Hours really range. I think it depends. Like we kind of ramp up towards the beginning, and then as we kind of gets close to the heat of the climax of the recruiting cycle, it kind of eases off a little bit more. But you can talk about anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a week, I would say. And we're talking most of the time spent on making the slide decks, professional, obviously like how investment banking would, emphasize, and collaborating with your teammates as well. So a lot of, preparation, but also slide deck creation and research and modeling, etc.
Sounds intense. This is on top of classes.
On top of classes,
And this
yes.
is on top of Academy, although Academy you'd already kind of done most of the assignments by this point, I assume, right? You're good.
Like I think like roughly like halfway or so.
Okay. So
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about just so how you kind of progressed at once you're on campus. Obviously super busy at the beginning with all these clubs and all this prep. Talk to me a little bit about the networking and like when did you scale that up? Were you already ramping it pretty aggressively by September or had you started over the summer? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So summer for me was more about, get some basics down, get some understandings down, and I had the internship at the summer as well. So it wasn't too intense.
Yeah.
My first batch of emails sent out was actually to my high school. So, and I was told it has a very strong alumni base, and also doing some research that appears to be the case.
Yeah.
I had some calls almost as like a kind of like a first wave of, trying to build my confidence, trying to build my networking
Fellow
skills.
Andover alum. Actually, I just recently did another one of these testimonies with another Andover guy. It's just funny. I guess it's a pattern, but yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
obviously very strong network, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, what was the conversion on those? So like email to actually getting on calls.
I think probably like close to 30% or 20% or something. So it's definitely a little bit higher. And also earlier in the cycle, so I would assume their inbox isn't as full at that point. But they did tell me that, if they're not from Cornell, they probably wouldn't help as much given that there are Cornell teams from these investment banks to kind of recruit for us. But, I think it's good for them to, be very frank about the whole process. Their experiences a lot less buttoned up, I would say, almost, because you get that kind of first web exposure to how to kind of maybe navigate calls moving forward. So I think that was pretty great. Eventually, I would say towards October is where things ramped up for me, or early October is when things ramped up for me for Cornell alumni. So, we're talking about, anywhere from 50 to almost 100 emails per week. Not every single week when there are breaks, but, for most of the weeks
Yeah.
to try to get that connection down.
Was there
Definitely
an
took a lot
email
of.
system that the Career Center helped you with, or were you doing kind of LinkedIn connection requests to alum followed by email for like that we sometimes advise for non-target? Because I know Career Center sometimes help you with this database. Do they give you that there?
For me, it's the latter. So it's just manual from my end.
Yeah.
No career service help there.
You leveraging Apollo? You leveraging Hunter? What are you doing?
Yeah, Paulo is a very big friend of mine.
Yeah.
Definitely said a lot. Sure.
Cool. Okay, so you're leveraging Apollo, and then you basically, um, you're just emailing, yeah, 50 to 100. Talk to me about the ratio. I think you said something pretty high. It was like 10 to 15% of the emails eventually led to calls.
Yeah, roughly around there. I mean, definitely there are certain times where it's way less responsive and other times where it's a lot higher, but that's just the way it is. And,
Mhm.
I get mentorship from this fraternity mentors as well as other people on campus to how to really structure those emails, make sure that you balance, brevity with details and customizable, like, messages. And also mentors from WSO helped me a little bit with that as well, to make sure that everything's kind of balanced and thought out.
In the follow-ups, you definitely were following up, correct? When they
Exactly. Yeah.
respond. Okay, so yeah, I mean, to get that high of a ratio conversion to calls means you definitely were following up. Otherwise, it probably would have been closer to the 3 to 5% range.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about just some these off-cycle internships, because on top of everything else, I do see you're basically able to start landing some stuff as well. I think as early as kind of capital raising, role kind of for a fall internship. How did you even land that? Was that through networking or is that just through alum? How did you get that?
Yeah, so I guess all of my internships that I have, they are mostly just through cold emails. Besides the exception of one investment bank, where it's actually through a Cornell club, where they want someone to lead, sourcing and outreach, et cetera, which I've experience with, and they had me just basically take up with that leadership role, I guess. But besides, that's all from cold emails. I think what maybe potentially stood out, maybe.
Just so the listeners know what I'm talking about. I see here investment banking associate. I mean, it was more of an executive search M&A, right? Right. But then I see DCF fall analyst, spring analyst. Then I see um, another summer analyst for obviously sophomore summer, right? But then another summer externship, right? And so like you're really stacking the CV with incredible branding. That's really what jumped out to me is like you're showing here going into recruiting that like you're serious about this and you're getting as much experience as possible. So yeah,
Mhm.
just give people a little bit of insight on how you converted these cold emails and networking calls. Like, how did you get them to say yes, you can come work for us for free? I assume they were for free, but like, how did you actually get them to say yes? Because I think a lot that's obviously very valuable in terms of you going into recruiting.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. I think I always approach these initial calls as just like a networking call, right? I don't want to ask for an internship or ask for a job per se, right? So I think for me, it's more about, having that connection locally first, and maybe, somewhere in New York or where I'm from in Connecticut first, and see how that really plays out. But I think, from my resume that I sent them initially, I took a gap year. And I think the things that did that gap year maybe helped me be a bit more differentiated. So, for example, I was working for the WSO research analyst position. I also work at the search fund, where I was actually managing other interns to kind of get through some operational, but also investment theses as well. So I think that combo definitely sparked some interest and, some kind of I guess trust in me, my abilities, and how that I'll be able to do certain tasks and also handle that information if I were to get the position. And I think, naturally, sometimes I ask, just kind of in any advice, kind of go into the recruiting process, what I could do. And sometimes they actually offer that position, or sometimes I might ask very subtly. But it's never really the main focus of the conversation or the intent initially. Is more to kind of connect with people, learn more about their experiences, also what they do, and also how that can maybe translate into my own ambitions as well.
Let's talk about the gap year for a second. Why a gap year?
Yeah, so I actually took a senior course in my high school about investments and personal finance. And I think combining that with my prior junior summer of high school's experience in entrepreneurship really kind of sparked my interest of, investment banking is actually a thing. It's actually something that can combine the two disciplines to some degree. And I think, kind of just doing a little bit more research in a senior of my high school about how fast-paced industry is, the recruiting
You
process,
were
et
on
cetera.
WSO already, weren't you? Like a senior in high school.
A little bit.
You can be honest. Okay, so like you kind of already knew what you wanted, but it was more a question of you felt like that gap year would give you a little bit, maybe a head start or ability to start branding yourself in that
I
direction.
think, yeah, it's like one to kind of gain some experiences through internships, but also two to see if I actually like it, right? Because if you can, learn about something conceptually and learn that okay, it's interesting to you, but it's another thing to actually do it and then see if it actually is for you or not. So yeah, both
How
reasons
did
led me
you
to.
how did you fit all these internships on your CV by the end?
Funny you
Like
say
you
that
have a lot
actually.
because I'm looking here. There's like it looks like you've been working for like 15 years based on see
Yeah,
how did
funny you say that. Yeah, because
yeah,
actually yesterday,
yeah, you
yeah,
could probably
sorry.
start chopping, right? You started chopping some, I assume.
Yeah, actually, yesterday I was with a WSO mentor to kind of gain some advice on how to kind of finalize my resume a little bit because for UBS, the group placement process happens next spring,
Yeah.
and I think for me personally, I probably wouldn't do much from now until then, if at all. So I think having a pretty good structure now is a good place to kind of be at as I go into the group placement process, and actually got some advice from a mentor at WSO Academy yesterday. So that's cool.
Nice. Okay, so you're going through that, you're kind of refining things. So you're somehow able to convert these to kind of externships or spring or fall analyst positions. So you have one fall analyst position kind of in that start of that crazy time for you, and fall semester sophomore year. You start ramping up your networking. We're now in October. You're doing what, 5 calls a week, 10 calls a week, and
Ooh.
you said it ended up by the time recruiting came around somewhere around 80 to 100 or something like that.
Somewhere like 70 to 80, I would say. But definitely, I wouldn't say it is like a 5 call per week type of thing. Like sometimes, yes, but most of the time, actually not. So I think the reason being is that there were definitely a lot of like I guess like volatile like response rates throughout the process. There were certain weeks where we had 0 or 1 or 2. There
Yeah,
were others where it's like 5 or 6 or 7.
yeah.
So it really depends on how that panned out. But I found that some of my like the buy side, I was recruiting buy side like very lightly. Some of their response rates are way higher. So I could say that with the mega fund that I was a part of the process with, almost every single person responded to me after I was invited for the first round.
Wow.
It's pretty surprising to me because I would assume they're pretty busy as well, right? But for that group in particular, they almost 100% response rates, and it was a great conversation. Just wanting to see what the group is like, what the culture is like, but also what the experience is like. So I think that
And
overall exposure is pretty nice.
this was for analyst private equity type role, like mega fund.
Not private equity, actually credit
Oh, credit. Private
investing.
credit.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're going through this process. Talk to me a little bit about the timing and like how things are progressing from October to November to December. You're getting to finals. The bank's already starting to open up in December, and you're like, oh my gosh, before the winter break even. So talk to me a little about how you approach that. Obviously, you got your apps in, I assume, right? But
Mhm.
was it just continue the grind in the
I would say from October until November is like my first major push for outreach, for emails, for calls, but also for me to really practice my high reviews, in terms of how to really structure those answers, make it concise, but also get the key points right.
yeah.
Um, I would
Did
say from
did
November,
you
like
do a simulation at all? Did you do like stare into the camera and talk to it or not?
yeah, a lot of them from my club's involvements. Yeah, we definitely had a lot of those for sure. I would say from November to December is more about the final stages of finalizing your resumes, finalizing your answers, polishing them up, get the advanced technicals down a little bit more. And December is more about that kind of very very final push, but also at the same time, try not to burn myself out too much. But for the actual, I guess for most banks, the actual thing starts in January. So it's a combination of everything. And then January and onwards, it's just more go time, right? You have your high reviews, you have your application drops, you have your rounds of interviews, you have your preps, your mocks, etc.
Yeah.
I definitely had mocks beforehand, but I will say as you get more experience throughout your recruiting process, you get more of a sense of what questions they're asking. Like for example, boutiques, they ask a lot of math heavy questions or different questions that pertains a lot more, note taking with a handwritten notes. You have to listen to what they're saying, the numbers, etc., and then finally calculate a number. Whereas for Bulges, it's a little bit more behavioral, which again, this going into the process, but once you're actually in it, you can realize exactly what type of questions to be asking, which will then, reflect into further mocks as well.
And so were you doing a lot of mocks with Academy kind of more in January, February? That's what I'm seeing on the dashboard. I'm seeing a couple there. Were you doing it mostly focused then, like in the middle?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's because I was kind of saving them almost onto that stage because the earlier ones I had, the mocks, it was more on campus, right? I
Yeah.
think the other mentors, they tend to be better behaviorally in terms of mocking because sometimes even they're not really sure about the technicals. It depends on how advanced we get, but I think it just made more sense, at least for me, to have the more like non very advanced technical questions be
Yeah.
saved until later for the academy. And I had a few that was really helpful to kind of be prepared for almost any type of interviews moving onwards.
Nice.
So
And so you were talk to me a little bit about just the numbers overall. So what you applied to, I assume like 40 places, 30 places, I don't know.
yeah,
Talk through
somewhere around there.
like the ratios because I think they were pretty impressive for you. So just do you want to just run through that?
Yeah, so I think I applied to maybe 30 to 40. I'm not sure exactly how many banks in total, but I would say probably in the 30s for sure.
Yeah.
And I think for my processes, I think 7 or 8 of them
Mhm.
I was in the process of, which was not bad. And I think in terms of that process to the super day was more about like four, like five or so, I think, maybe out of the seven or eight that I was in the final rounds for.
Was it a mix, bulge bracket, elite boutique, middle market? Was it everything? All the above?
Yeah, it's middle market, bulge bracket. I don't think Elite Boutique was one, but those two, but also the buy side as well, for out of the five of them.
Credit, the mega fund credit. Okay, cool.
And Meg Fund and also the hedge fund too.
So kind of tough actually to get ready for all those different things. You got to know private credit. You got to know why you want to be at a bulge bracket. You got to know why you want to be at a smaller middle market, and you have to know, yeah, wow, okay, so that's you didn't get any favor, no favors were done to you in terms of going into super days, in terms of like having overlap, right?
Yeah.
Was that talk to me about the timing? So when did those all those super days kind of hit? Was it all in February, March? Like thought what when did they actually like the timing and did you have to like defer an offer or anything like that or what happened, I guess, at the end?
No, it's actually around this. I mean, I would say it's from early February until late March. So it is all around the same time frame. But for me, it made sense to kind of, I think, kind of go into the buy side a bit more. I was actually joining a new club at Cornell for my spring semester, and that club helps a lot with like investing rationales and business acumen.
Yeah.
And I think that's like one of my weaknesses going into the process is because yes, I had invested before, and yes, I'd done stock pitches before at Boston College as well, but how do I translate that into the actual kind of conversations in the interviews, right? So I think, definitely supplemented my approach, but throughout the whole process, I didn't really defer anything. It kind of, some of them were really tight. Like I had, I think, two or three on the same week or so, but not on the same day.
Yeah.
And I had finals on the same exact day. Well, not the finals, but the exams as well on the same exact day. So I had to kind of really navigate that. I think that was towards late February, early March timeframe. So that was pretty tough, but again, you have to push it through. It is a part of the process. You have to kind of just go after it, and hopefully it works out. And it did work out at the end. So
So
yeah,
do you feel like the hedge fund interview was it tough? Are you comfortable saying what the hedge fund was, or do you want to just keep that?
yeah, it was 0.72. And I mean, it wasn't tough conventionally.
Okay. Yeah, tell me what made it hard.
I think it's more about like so they really ask a little bit more about how you understand the business fundamentally. And I don't just mean like, okay, you memorize certain numbers or certain metrics. It's more about from an investor's perspective, like how do you really deviate your viewpoints about the stock's performance compared to the market, right? And I think yes, you can have your basic macro, micro, like bottom up, like, or other way around, like those approaches in terms of how you evaluate the company.
Mhm.
They really kind of dig deep in terms of like, okay, like what's the unit economics of a certain company, right? What's the like the bullish framework? What's the projection percentages, but also backed by qualitative evidence? How you can really saw a new piece of news that is not really observed out there.
Yeah.
You can maybe argue that's kind of similar to equity research, but not really because it's less about like a report type of thing, but more about report plus that kind of bullish or bearish statement about a company, and you can be very confidently able to back that up. So I think it was a great learning process for me because I wasn't really the most prepared for it in terms of knowing how to do everything before like months in advance, like I did for investment banking.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, I was really grateful to be able to make it to the final round because I was able to learn a lot, from how to approach certain things moving forward about unconventional questions or kind of going beyond the different established frameworks of a structured response for sure.
Did you end up getting a stock pitch question after that whole process of point 72 ever like later in the because that would have been nice after all that work getting to use it
Uh,
again?
Yeah, for the mega fund, yes.
Yeah.
So they actually did ask a little bit more about my stock pitch experiences, and I remember kind of talking them through my pitch from Boston College actually, because that was one of the most memorable ones I've had. I was able to meet the CEO of that company that I pitched, which is pretty impressive for looking back at it. I don't know how
Like
that
for a
happened.
freshman, for a freshman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we pitched the company, and then, the club eventually bought the company's stocks as well. So that was a pretty good experience, I think. So
Cool.
definitely, yeah, definitely helped.
So talk to me a little bit about just yeah, how things progressed, the outcome, yeah, what ended up happening.
Yeah, so I kind of going to my like towards the end of my recruiting cycle. I had a few processes already in hand, but I had UBS, coming up that week, and I think given the different options and different kind of people I've spoken to from these different processes and banks, I think made the most sense for me at the time. So I actually turned down I think one or two processes afterwards after I received the offer from UBS, and they told me like the next morning.
Yeah.
I remember I actually skipped my first class because I was so exhausted from the night before. I had the exam as well as the super day
Um,
that day, and I was like, you know what? I deserve a break. I have like I think like 8 a.m. I think. So I was, you know what, I have to sleep in today. I can't do it. And I
You
actually
got a
got the
call while you were
call.
sleeping?
Like when I just woke up, I actually got a call right then as
Yeah,
well. It was like I think like close to like maybe 9 a.m. almost at the time.
yeah.
And it was just congratulations, all that good stuff. And I actually had a few of the MDs as well as the other kind of Cornell alumni call me afterwards as well to kind of, I guess, provide more insights about UBS and what they've been doing to really kind of help me make my decision as well. So
And in terms of like looking back, I guess, obviously it took a huge weight off, right? When you knew, hey, I did it. I all that hard work paid off.
yeah.
Uh, Kind of looking back at just the whole path, would you have done anything differently? Would you have done as many internships? Would you have kind of done the trans? I mean, it all worked out, so I assume the answer is yes, but anything you would have changed at all?
Actually, a lot actually. I mean, they're subtle, but a lot. I would say I probably should have spent a bit more time nailing the hardest technical questions down even before going to my sophomore year. I mean, that's a very hard ask almost because I was doing an internship beforehand. Or during the summer of my freshman year, I was also trying to, I guess, enjoy my summer before, the hard year of sophomore year really strikes me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think if I were to have the hardest technicals down before going to my sophomore year, I would have more time to make up space for the networking processes of Cornell alumni. For my case specifically, because I didn't know any of the Cornell alumni my freshman year, right? So that's one thing I think that really stood out. I think some other things include for emails, maybe try to kind of understand the framework a bit earlier. I think I experimented with different ways of approaching the emails during I guess, the beginning September to October timeframe,
Yeah.
where I would, occasionally like maybe not customize as much for certain weeks or try to emphasize a certain point that maybe not the best points to emphasize as I approach these new, contacts. But I think all those things are part of learning. Obviously, if I had the knowledge that I do now and apply that to back then, I would change a lot of things. But I think the biggest one is, really knowing how to write your emails in a very concise but also attractive manner, but also at the same time, narrow technicals down as soon as possible, even the hardest ones maybe, before going to your sophomore year to be sure that the things that you can't control has been controlled and the things that you cannot control as much is, up for you to, I guess, navigate in
Yeah,
your
or at
fall.
least you can focus on tilting them in your favor, even though you can't control it fully, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking of other students that are listening to this that are in their junior year being like, "Oh, forget it, I'm done, I'm toast." And I want to just tell PSA to those listeners, like it's not over for you. And yes, on-cycle recruiting is kind of the easiest way to kind of get a seat. But there is a full-time process usually, unless the deal volume is drying out. And there's often ways to take half steps towards your eventual goal. So like it's interesting that you're looking back and be like, I would have done this, this, and this, or I wish I had done this earlier. Yet your outcome was great. And I think what's interesting is like the numbers you gave me in terms of like emails to calls to first round to super days. It's like textbook. It's like totally textbook. I think you had just an added wrinkle with the transfer going into sophomore year that made it a little bit harder for you. And you probably didn't maybe you underestimated how tough sophomore year would be, and so now you're like kicking your freshman self like, don't be so lazy that freshman summer and to help me like get these advanced technicals down a little bit more. um cool, man. Well, anything else you want to share? Any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think just at the end of the day, it is definitely for a lot of people probably the most stressful time they've had up until this point, definitely professionally. So I think just kind of thinking back, if you were to be able to try, like look back into your younger self and be like, you know what, I gave my best, I'm gonna give my best effort, and also tried my best to kind of navigate things and split them up, by chunks and not try to do everything at once, and that's all you could do.
Yeah.
I think no matter the result, you should be content with, the efforts you provided during that time process, and I think regardless of what outcome might come out, whether you think it's unfair or frustrated or stuff like that, I think just take it as a learning lesson, regardless, and apply to future endeavors as well. So don't
Yeah.
be too hard on yourself, because I think I was pretty harsh on myself a little bit too much almost. But it is still good to have that mindset to be disciplined, but at the same time know that not if everything is up to you.
Yeah, and I can tell you the few students that don't land offers, either inside or outside academy, if they have the right mindset of just continuing to do what they've learned in terms of like reaching out to people and not stopping, opportunities find them. eventually. And it can take a lot of calls, but if you can enjoy the calls and enjoy the networking chats and actually focus on building relationships rather than making it transactional, I think we've harped on it so many times in this pod and everything. And so like I hope people are really taking that to heart because um, what Max did is hard. This is not easy what you did, but it's also kind of like what's needed to be done in order to get the outcome you want. So thank you for sharing your
Mhm.
story. Really appreciate it.
Course. Sorry, that's just one last advice as well.
Yes, yes.
In the interest section of your resume, be creative, right? I think that's
Yes.
something overlooked. I remember for my buy side interviews as well as some of the sell side as well, but because I'm a dancer, I like to produce music. I like to do policy analysis, but also just kind of experiment with both sports as well as music. I think that sometimes can take over the conversations, whether that be a networking call or actual interview. I remember for one of my first rounds for the mega fund, the whole conversation was almost about music creation because the interviewer coincidentally is also a music producer or like a DJ guy. So definitely really helped out in terms of breaking the ice per se, right? So I think don't be don't be conservative in trying to show that creative side of you or that non-conventionally professional side of you to your recruiters or other analysts who are interviewing you. Let that shine through and actually can help you sometimes.
Absolutely. It's the easiest way to build relationships and actually have a meaningful conversation and not be so like people don't necessarily want to talk about their deals, right?
Mhm.
And so it's actually funny that you mentioned that because I was chatting with one of our students earlier over DM today, and I was like, let me see your CV because he was like, more at a non-target. His GPA is okay, so he has an uphill battle. And I was looking at his interests, and they're just super generic. And I'm like, these are the most generic. It was like poker. I'm like, well, tell me what kind of poker. It was like, like at least say Texas No Limit Hold'em, whatever. Just be specific. Like, give me some more meat on that. And it was like soccer. It's like, okay, playing or watching, certain team, what? And so I think it's important that you not only get creative with it, but like be specific because you'd be surprised, like when you find somebody that has that same actual passion or interest, like almost the entire conversation could be about that, and it's a much better connection that actually will last, and that person could be the one that ends up pushing you through to an interview and eventually help you get the offer. So uh,
Definitely.
awesome, Max. Well, I appreciate you sharing your story. Of course, please stay in touch.
Yep. Thanks so much for your time.
Awesome.